A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all honor, all praises, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Makakwadash, double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquathim. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Require. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will as always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to just go through some exhortation in regards to some thoughts I've been having in regards to for single brothers that actually may not have a lot of experience with women. With women, and just to add a couple 2 cents in regards to exhortation, just in regards to building up yourself spiritually and not looking at your situation as being a single young man as a bad thing or a single man as a bad thing, not looking at it and essentially to also use it as an opportunity to get closer to Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, learning through and going through the different stories of our forefathers, the different situations that they were in, and being able to spiritually extrapolate a lot of the information of the things that and the mistakes or the things that they did were actually very well. The scriptures talk about how to inquire the ways of our forefathers, right? And that's why the things that are written aforetime are written for our learning, so we can get understanding in regards to the different experiences that these men went through, right? And how can we actually improve on the things that they may have fell short on, but also taking the nuggets on things that they did that were exceptionally well, right? So not to look at our situation, and I guess I'm kind of more speaking in regards to single brothers that are actually not really dealing with women like that. What I'm saying? Not actually living with one, or you're not, you may not have a lot of experience, with them, right, with women, right? But just as an exhortation to comfort brothers, because sometimes coming out from this world as young men, we strongly have attached a lot of our self-worth and our self image and value and our presence in regards to having them, and to not have them, it kind of feels like we are we a lot of men will feel like less of a man if they didn't have any of them, right? Yes, we're supposed to join together, and essentially become one flesh, but and you look at the landscape of the nature of the society, you realize. And then on top of that also, if I may add this as well, when you continue to actually work on yourself and work on a lot of your self-development, you know cultivating yourself, actually going through and extracting a lot of the experiences that you go through with Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, put you in, and be able to, extract those nuggets from those different situations. And you realize it kind of more emboldens you to, to actually, and it cultivates a sentiment of growth, so I kind of wanted to just read a couple things here and there. I didn't really have any, I guess, plan laid out, but just to hit a couple key points, because as it's just essentially just an exhortation, right? So I wanted to read this in Ecclesiastes. This is chapter 7, verse 16, and it says, "Be not righteous over much, neither make thyself over wise. Why shouldest thou destroy thyself?" Right? And a reason I'm reading this also is because sometimes as young men, even when you speak with and you deal with a lot of our people, in the world, they a lot of our men, they have that sentiment of, okay, they want to multiply and have a lot of women. You know what I'm saying? And without actually, carefully, considering, oh man, if I'm doing this, and if I don't have certain kinds of provisions, what I'm saying, like, I don't have some substance, I'm not able to properly deal with this. So essentially, a lot of our men, what they will do is they'll try and add a lot of women, and then they don't actually have the not just the spiritual substance, but they don't have the physical substance to be able to manage that, right? So they end up destroying themselves, right? This is why I'm reading this here, because and even if you're like, okay, a young brother like myself, you hear about your customs and your heritage for the first time, and you can have multiple women and all that kind of stuff. You think that man, this is great, man. You're excited, but when you really take a step back and you do some actual consideration, and you realize, like, oh man, I have to work on this, I have to work on that, I have to self-examine, what I'm saying. Through that self-examination process, you realize, what, this actually might destroy me, and I don't think I really want to deal with this at this time. I could kind of postpone this, what I'm saying. But you know it's just understanding and then reflecting and realizing, this actually, that reflection process is, to properly, to help you, to build you, right? The scriptures talk about how, when you're converted, to essentially strengthen, thy brethren, right? So, that's really the purpose, of this exhortation, really, right? So let me jump down here to, I want to jump down to verse 19. And it says here that, wisdom strengtheneth the wise more than 10 mighty men which are in the city, right? So when you think about the so-called mighty men of our people, within the world and stuff like that, it shows you that, wisdom triumphs, their, if they had wisdom, let me say it like this: if they had wisdom, they would triumph from these particular situations that they may go through, whether it might be Steph Curry, whether it might be Will Smith, whether it might be, Tyrese Gibson, this person, that person. And it shows you that wisdom really is the script, when the scriptures talk about how it's the principal thing, right? Because when you realize and you look at a lot of their situations that they go through, it just really deals with our people just not having the wisdom, right? The scriptures talk about, she prevented them that desire her, right? So they get caught up into these different situations because, our people reject wisdom, in reality, right? So let me, and another thing I also wanted to hit, with this lesson here, is, okay, if you may not have one, it can serve as a spiritual benefit and a spiritual opportunity, for you. Think of it as, there's a show I used to watch back in the day called Dragon Ball Z. And there's this thing in the show, they call it the hyperbolic time chamber, right? Where the warriors, they would go in, and they would essentially would fight in this chamber, right? So the chamber basically is designed to squeeze in a certain amount of, what's it called, training. But the training is, it's basically a lot more on the outside world, right? So the outside world, it might be like a day, but inside, when you're in that chamber, that day on the outside world can serve as like 6 months, right? They have plenty of food in there, but they have to go through this extensive amount of training within that time, right? So, not looking at our situations, to bring it back to the point, not looking at our situations as, a detriment because we don't have a woman, but looking at also as an opportunity, for us to actually, spiritually, develop. Essentially, that's really the point I really wanted to hit. So this is, looking as an opportunity to develop certain areas and becoming more well-rounded, right? This is oh, Salakia, 1 second. First Timothy. This is First Timothy chapter 4, verse 12, and I want to read down a little bit. And here it says, "And let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in word and conversation, in charity, in spirit, and in faith, and in purity." Right? So, conversation, when you go into that word conversation, it really refers to a manner of life. It shows to it refers to the way you actually conduct yourself, right? And then we're reformed, right? And that's part of that, essentially, that training process, because, and one thing I've noticed as well, when you develop, the when you trim the fat, so to speak, women, they actually start to pick up on those things, whether you're actually with them or not. Because the scriptures talk about how a man is known by his walk, right? The way he conducts himself. They actually, in secret, they actually pick up on these things, whether they might have a long chat with you or not. So, this is, I'm saying this to say, like, yo, don't worry too much about, not having them, right? Yeah, because we think about them because we like women, but at the same time, like, they notice these things, right? This is verse 13, and it says, "Till I come, give attendance to reading, to exhortation, to doctrine." And right, and this goes back into, going back into the different accounts too, and looking at the pitfalls of the mistakes, or looking at the good examples where, certain of our forefathers, exemplified certain fruits of the spirit, and being able to, take out and extract, okay, this is what this person did in this particular situation, and this is how much it was a benefit to them, right? And and as because I was reading, we were reading Ecclesiastes earlier, just thinking about it, one of the things that Solomon prayed for, and when you go back into his account, that was one of the principal things that he prayed for, was wisdom, because he actually explained, and he said, I am but a child, please, give me the essentially the knowledge on how to actually instruct these people. That was part of his prayer, to roughly paraphrase, right? So that it shows you the importance, of the reading and the exhortation, right? So here it says, verse 14, and it says, "Neglect not the gift that is in thee, which was given to thee by prophecy, um, and laying on the hands of the presbytery. Meditate upon these things, and give yourself wholly to them, and that thy profiting might appear to all. Take heed unto thyself and unto thy doctrine, and continue in them. For in doing this, thou shalt both save thyself and them that hear thee." Right? So, there's just, meditate on the, the different, things that we know, essentially, we read about, right? Because it makes you profitable, going through the experience, because sometimes, that's another aspect of it too, of actually being within that period. Okay, if you don't have one, okay, here is something, you might read about something, and then, or you might be actually being in a discussion, with other brothers and elders or whoever, right? And you might get the actual theory of what is actually being spoken of, and then you might go through a particular situation, and then you have to apply the the know-how of what it was, and then to actually, get through that situation, because you actually made the effort to actually read, or even be around the elders. And that's another portion I wanted to, discuss as well, right? So this is let me go to the book of Sirach. This is Sirach chapter 8, verse 8, and it says, "Despise not the discourse of the wise, but acquaint thyself with their proverbs. For of them thou shalt learn instruction and how to serve great men with ease. Miss not the discourse of the elders, for they learned of their fathers, and of them thou shalt learn understanding, and to give answer as need requireth," right? So, just shows you the importance of actually, extracting and being in the presence. And the scriptures talk about this, to be essentially, be continually, I should say, with godly men that knoweth how to keep the commandments, to roughly paraphrase, right? And when you go into the story, like, for example, I'll use King Rehoboam as an example. Because after Solomon's passing, you have King Rehoboam, he ascends to the throne and he starts to rule, right? One of the mistakes that he actually made himself was, he disregarded the counsel and the advice of the older men, right? And he hearkened unto the voice of the younger men instead, right? So, they don't have a lot of experience. So it's kind of like today, how, okay, you might have, a young Israelite, he might actually, he might go speak to his, his parents in regards to something, and his parents, actually been through the experience. Okay, they tell him something, and then instead of listening to actually what his parents said, he goes and listens to his friends, and his friends tell him something else, because his friends, they're thinking from more, they might think, they're not thinking from somebody who has experience, right? And then he hearkens onto the voice of his friends as opposed to his parents, right? So it's the same dynamic here, right? Because it shows that you know it shows the importance of elders, and what's it called, people who have experience, right? Apostles and elders and so on and so forth, right? So that's pretty much the point I really just wanted to hit. Oh, let me hit this in Sirach as well, actually. This is Sirach chapter 39, verse 1. I'm going to jump down to 5. And it says here, "But he that giveth his mind to the law of the Most High, Yahweh Bashim Shai, and is occupied in the meditation thereof, will seek out the wisdom of all the ancient, and be occupied in prophecies," right? So this is back to the point, it's showing, to constantly, and the importance, I should say, as well, of being occupied, right? And in a meditation thereof, because essentially, this is why we go into these different accounts, looking at the things that pertain and happen within our history, and looking at the things, the way, learning more about our enemies and the way they fight, and being occupied in the prophecies. All these things are written for our learning, right? And we know what to look for in terms of prophecies, right? So I'm going to jump down to verse 5, and it says, "And he will and he will give his heart to resort early to the Lord that made him, and will pray before the Most High, and will open his mouth in prayer, and make supplication for his sin." Let me get that word supplication, actually. Just for edification. Supplication here, it says earnest request, humble request. It says a public prayer, to beg humbly. I entreat you. It says to calm, to appease, to quiet, to soothe, to assuage. It says to please, right? So essentially, sub means under, and the plication goes back to placare. So it says to soothe, right? So essentially, we're in a situation where we're forced to be in subjection, where, okay, we're making a request because we understand that we transgressed, and we're making that, that request for the Lord to forgive us and have mercy upon us, right? So just going back into, when you don't have a woman, these are the things that we focus on, right? So the prophecy, the exhortation, the reading, looking at it as an opportunity to essentially develop yourselves, and you can make yourselves even more profitable, within that space of when you don't have one. Because a lot of times, and this is another aspect of some things I've noticed as well, a lot of times when you hear a lot of these young men, the way they speak, they're more of that mindset of they're kind of giving them their mindset is more like, okay, they give their woman, everything, give them a woman their all, and so to speak, and then what happens, they end up losing themselves. So you see how, if they knew, especially our people, if they knew about how, what's the word I'm looking for, if they knew about the certain accounts, like for example, I'll use Solomon as an example, because Solomon's transgression was, okay, he started to, when he got to a certain point, he was doing well. He built the house of the Lord, and then, he started building those abominations and paying more reference to those abominations of the other nations, right? So, and it caused him to transgress against the Heavenly Father. And a lot of our men, they make that mistake without actually knowing Solomon and his actual mistake, right? So you see how the importance of bringing it back to the point of how, knowing the wisdom of the ancient and knowing the ways of the Heavenly Father, knowing the accounts of our history, make a huge difference, right? So let me go back to where I was reading here. I'll read verse 6, and it says, and where the great Lord will, it says, he shall be filled with the spirit of understanding, he shall pour out wise sentences and give thanks unto the Lord in his prayer, right? So, that's pretty much, the point, I kind of wanted to hit in regards to, this point about, okay, brothers, if you don't have one, it can serve also as a spiritual development, for you, right? Don't look at it as something to destroy you, but look at it as an opportunity to build you, right? Look at it as essentially weight training, spiritual, I should say, like weight training to actually, strengthen you and build you, right? And through these different experiences, being able to extract, because the scriptures also talk about how the spiritual man judgeth all things, right? So you're able to spiritually extract, when you go through certain situations, that either it may end up favorably or not, okay, what could I done, differently, and then being able to move forward, right? Because we're going to make mistakes, right? But, the point really is that, using that time, by yourself, don't look at it as a bad thing, but look at it as an opportunity, right? So anyways, I'll leave the lesson there, but I sincerely hope and this lesson really was edifying. I just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.